Ark Meridian hung off our bow with half its running lights dark, and the other half burning through layers of ice, as if the ship had spent 300 years drowning in black water and had only just broken the surface. Even from 5 clicks out, she was too large to take in at once. Our cutter kept sliding along her flank and still never found an edge in the main view. Habitat ring, cargo spine, drive mass, radiator fields folded in close for drift. Every part of her had the swollen confidence of first-wave colony money, the kind of build nobody had commissioned in my lifetime. Tess Holt stood behind my chair in a mag harness, one hand on the overhead rail, reading off the final docking sequence while Eric Shaw fed the approach burn into guidance. Nate Collins sat by the lock with his rifle across his knees, visor open, broad face set in the kind of silence that meant he had already decided the ship was bad news and resented being asked to prove it. Dr. Julia Bennett floated at the aft console, watching Meridian's telemetry scroll past with the hungry stillness of somebody seeing a career alter course in real time. I was there to board first, assess second, and patch what could still be patched if we found a reason to keep anyone breathing. Recovery specialist, contract grade, breach med salvage triage, field repairs. That title covered more sins than a priest. Pressure differential still within margin, I said. Dock collar on her side is reading active. That's the part I don't like. Eric grinned without looking at me. You never like the active parts. I like active parts when I own the service history. Tess leaned closer to the front glass. Meridian answered a registry ping. She kept gravity. She kept climate. She kept enough power to cycle a beacon after 3 centuries. Nobody here owns the service history. Julia finally turned from her screen. Water circulation remains active in several trunk systems. Oxygen processing too. Nate laughed. 300 years and the plumbing still works. Great. Real comforting. I checked my suit seals again, though I'd already checked them twice. Habit. Old job. Spend enough years in neonatal transfer and you stop trusting anything that stands between a body and vacuum. Tiny masks, tiny lines, tiny hearts that quit for reasons the monitors never tell you in time. I'd been out of that work for years. My hands still carried it like a scar under the skin. Meridian filled the glass now, a continent of scarred alloy and black viewports. Ice sheets clung to seams. Micrometeor strikes had pecked one whole side to dull grey. Along the docking band, faded gold letters still showed through grime. Ark Meridian Civilian Settlement Vessel, North American Exodus Authority. A lie printed large enough for whole worlds to trust. I thought then that the lie sat at the end of the story, waiting for us to uncover it. I had no sense yet that we were docking into the middle of it. Eric eased us in. The cutter shuddered once as our collar took the load. Soft capture, he said. Mag clamp set. Tess pointed at each of us in turn. Luke first through, Nate with him. Eric on tether support. Julia stays on data. I want atmosphere, radiation, and structural report before we move 3 steps past the lock. We find survivors. We shift mission. We find plague. We cut loose. We find salvage and a clean route. We earn a year of peace. 2 years, Eric said. Tess gave him half a glance. You'd burn your share inside 6 months. That's because I know how to live. Nobody answered. It landed harder than he meant it to. He knew it as soon as it left his mouth. He flicked a look toward me, apology ready, and I saved him the trouble. Get the line guns ready, I said. If Meridian bucks when we cycle the seal, I want anchors set fast. He nodded and went to work. I rose, stepped into the lock cradle, and let the suit arms close me in. My helmet came down. Systems rolled through in my ear with the familiar clipped tone of rented hardware. Pressure integrity, temperature, med patch inventory, 2 breaching charges, 1 compact torch, foam sealant, short-range scanner, blood coagulant, pain block, emergency oxygen. I clipped a small hard case to my thigh and locked a pry bar at my back. Nate sealed into his armor beside me, thicker plates, rifle mag full, sidearm at his hip. Tess came into the lock long enough to put one gloved hand on my shoulder plate. "Your call inside," she said. "Give me truth, not optimism." "I charge extra for optimism. That's why I hired you." The inner hatch shut behind us. Pumps drew pressure down. Metal groaned through the chamber walls. Eric's voice came over comms, softer now under helmet processing. "You were right about one thing, Luke. Meridian's collar is active from her side. Somebody kept the motors exercised." Nate shifted his rifle. "Somebody or something." Julia cut in. "Motor wear patterns suggest automated cycling." Nate said, "You sound disappointed." Tess's voice came back flat and sharp. "Stay useful." The channel went quiet, except for breathing and pump noise. The outer hatch split down the middle and rolled aside. Gravity took hold at once, 3/4 Earth standard. My boots found deck with a muted strike. Light spilled through the threshold in thin, white strips set into the floor. The docking throat stretched ahead in a clean tube of composite ribs and service ports, dry and intact. I stepped through first with the scanner up. "Atmo stable," I said. "Oxygen breathable. Trace organics elevated. Pressure good. No toxins above danger line." I took 2 more paces and put my glove on the wall. Warm, body warm. The docking throat should have been cold after that long unless Meridian had kept full climate across dead decks for 300 years, which would have been insane by itself. I looked at the service markings by the nearest access panel. Fresh tools scoring around the latch, weeks or months old, not centuries. "Nate," I said, "check the wall ports." He crouched, touched one latch and pulled his hand away. "Heat," Eric answered from the cutter. "Luke, I'm reading a fluid pressure spike in the line network past your position." "Water." Julia paused a beat too long before answering. "Mixed medium, mostly water, something heavier in suspension." She already knew something she didn't want to say yet. Tess came through behind us with Julia at her shoulder. Eric stayed at the lock long enough to take one more look at the docking feed, then came in carrying the portable console under one arm, line gun on his back. He sealed the hatch. "Route to command?" Tess asked. Julia pointed down the corridor. "Main access lifts are powered. The nearest path to command crosses a nursery deck and then the arboretum band. Habitat ring after that." "Nursery?" Eric said. "On a colony ship that tracks." "Depends what the babies were for," Nate muttered. We moved in formation through the throat and into the first pressure door. Meridian opened it for us before Eric could touch the manual override. The deck beyond was quiet in the wrong way. The ship carried the low rush of active circulation inside the walls, a liquid movement under panels and through the floor. I could hear vent fans far off, and beneath that, a slow timing cycle like valves opening in sequence. Every system had life in it. Human life should have left clutter, voices, decay, records of panic. Instead, the corridor gave us spotless wall panels, clean floor junctions, and signage lit in soft amber. Nursery ward ahead, care intake, development suites, family sleep annex. I stopped at the threshold and knew before I stepped through that I was walking into a room built to hurt me. Rows of cradles filled the ward in curving lines that followed the outer hull. Each sat under a clear cover with integrated monitors, feed pumps, thermal control, and restraint arms sized for infants. I'd worked around enough pediatric transfer units to read the design at a glance. Most of the hardware came from real care practice. Airway access, heart rhythm watch, temperature regulation, fluid management. Then the rest came into focus. Every cradle had 2 extra ports on the left rail, heavy draw lines, not feed lines, collection chambers mounted under the mattress frame, drain regulators with volume control, pressure dampers built to protect tiny veins during repeated extraction. The tubing ran down through the floor into a grouped channel wide enough for the whole room. Tess swore under her breath. Eric stepped past me and stopped so hard he nearly fell backward in the lower gravity. Jesus. Julia drifted toward the nearest cradle, pulled by work. I caught her wrist before she touched it. "Look first." She did. Her face changed in a way I respected. No easy horror, no performance, just the moment a hard mind accepted a worse truth, and underneath that acceptance, began assembling it. "These were maintained," she said. "Of course they were," Nate said. "This whole ship's maintained." I knelt by the nearest rail. The plastic surface held a spiderweb of tiny scratches where bracelets or tags had dragged back and forth over time. The collection chamber below still carried a dark ring around the lower seam. Dry, old, real. I opened a side compartment and found sealed spare cannulas in infant size, each package stamped with launch year lot codes. Beneath them sat a handwritten card under clear laminate. Care shift initials, extraction interval, target volume, refeed schedule, routine notes, not an emergency log. A nursery record written by somebody who had done this often enough to shorten every word. Eric looked away first. "Who builds this into a colony ark?" Julia's gaze tracked the floor channels. "Someone designing for long-term biological support under constrained supply." Nate stared at her. "That answer supposed to make it cleaner?" "No, but you like it anyway." I moved to a cradle near the back row where one monitor still showed standby status. The mattress gel felt warm through my glove. Moisture clung to the inside of the clear shell. Recent condensation, recent cycle. I found the access latch and lifted the cover. The inside held a shallow depression shaped for a child long dead. At the head end, 2 tiny venous taps waited under a padded arch. Along the side, a retention cuff carried newer fabrication than the frame around it, something the ship had printed after launch to keep the old design in service. Tess crouched beside me. "Could a system keep this warm on a timer?" "Could," I said. "Could also keep it warm, because it still expects occupancy." Nate turned a full circle with his rifle up. "I'm done liking this deck." I opened a wall cabinet by the nurse station. Inside sat folded wraps sized for infants, medical gel packs, injector pens, and a row of family photos clipped to a board. Mothers, fathers, children, launch day pictures under bright banners. Ordinary faces, ordinary hopes. 2 of the children looked about the age my son had been when we lost him during the Kettering Station vent fire. 8 months old and furious at the world, always red in the face when the monitor caps bothered him. I used to think anger meant strength. After Kettering, I learned how fast strength leaves a body that small. I took one photo down and slid it back where I'd found it. My glove looked too large in that room. Tess saw the change in me. She kept her voice low enough for the others to miss half of it. "Can you keep point?" I made myself nod. "Yes," I said, "I can keep point." That seemed to satisfy her, or maybe she knew it had to. I stood. "Here's the truth. This deck was part of the design, not some emergency conversion. These cradles weren't built to save children. They were built to harvest them without killing them fast." Nate looked at Tess. "We cut loose now." Tess stared at the dark line network in the floor. "We came for answers." "We have one. Ship is poison." "Poison goes somewhere," I said. "If Meridian's beacon brought us, it can bring others. We leave without knowing what she is. We hand this to the next crew blind." Julia rose from her floor scan, visor lit blue. The draw lines feed a main trunk that runs forward and inward. It joins a larger circulatory route near the arboretum. Eric gave a brittle laugh. "You hear yourself saying circulatory?" I choose accurate words. "That's what worries me." Tess made the call. "We keep moving. Fast. Luke stays point. Julia stays off unknown surfaces unless cleared. Nate, rear watch. Eric, breadcrumb our return route." Nate muttered something I missed under suit audio, but he moved. I took one last look at the cradles before we left. The clear covers reflected our helmet lamps in curved strips that made each bed look occupied for a split second at a time. My hands wanted to shake. I kept them busy instead. I sealed the ward doors behind us and set a route marker on the jam. The corridor into the arboretum band widened and curved with the ship. Meridian lit our path in sections ahead of us, never late, never early. The wall signage shifted from care services to agricultural support and habitat nutrition. Water noise grew stronger. A deep, glassy rush travelled through the deck, above us, below us, around us, the sound of a vast hidden river moving with purpose. Eric worked his console as we walked. "I've got map stubs, nothing complete. Whole chunks of the archive are partitioned behind command authority." "Can you get access?" Tess asked. "Maybe if command still thinks we belong here." Julia said, "It already opened doors for us." Nate answered, "That's what I keep saying." We passed through a final bulkhead and entered the arboretum. I'd expected dead hydroponic racks, dry irrigation channels, collapsed trellises, maybe a few stubborn vines fighting under emergency lamps. Meridian gave us a forest. Trunks rose through multiple deck levels, pale in some places, dark red in others, each wrapped in smooth, skin-like bark, veined with clear conduits. Branches spread under the habitat dome and braided together overhead in thick crowns. Transparent sacs hung among them filled with moving fluid and darker solids that shifted as pressure moved through. Root bundles plunged through the floor grates in ropes thicker than my torso and vanished into the deck. Water flowed inside the growths. You could watch it climb. The path between the trunks had once been a public garden walk. Benches remained along the edges, half swallowed by woody masses that had grown through their frames. Old plaques stood at intervals with names for fruit species and pollinator plants that had never had a chance to root here. Along one trunk near the entrance, a child's yellow shoe lay embedded heel first in the bark. Eric's voice came small in the huge space. "I want to go home." Tess turned in a slow circle, eyes tracking the canopy. "Tell me how this happens." Julia's breathing sharpened in my ear. She had crossed from fear into attention, and that shift in a person always scared me more than panic. "The arboretum was the ship's gas exchange and water treatment band," she said. "Any bioengineered substrate placed here would have access to light, humidity, mineral feed, trace waste, thermal stability." "Talk like a person," Nate said. "It grew into life support," I said. Julia looked up through the branches, like somebody standing under a cathedral she hated and admired at once. "Yes, and life support grew around it." I moved to the nearest root column and aimed my scanner through the skin. The readout filled with hemoglobin analogues, plasma salts, suspended nutrient proteins, bacterial filters, and a web of active cellular transfer I couldn't fully pass in the field. Human blood markers ran through all of it, old and new. My light caught metal deep inside one root bundle. I knelt and scraped away a little growth with the edge of my glove. A wedding band stared back at me, swallowed to the knuckle by wood and flesh. "Luke," Tess said quietly. I stood and turned my lamp toward a rise in the central path. Something like a gardener's station sat there under a canopy of thick red leaves. We moved toward it in a tight group. The station had once held nutrient controls, pruning tools, and growth monitors. Now its surfaces were fused into the nearest trunk by sheaths of translucent tissue. A central basin in front of it held clear water. Beneath the surface, long, thin shapes drifted. I leaned closer. Human fingers, dozens of them, joined at the base by a single mass like roots from cut flowers dropped in a vase. Eric made a sound inside his helmet and killed it halfway through. Julia was already scanning the basin. "These are not random remains. The growth is sorting structures by function." "Function for what?" Tess asked. Before Julia could answer, a sharp chime cut through comms. Eric's suit alarm. He jerked back, slapped at his left wrist, and stared at the red icon on his forearm display. "Seal breach. Tiny one." "Where?" I crossed to him. He lifted his arm. Near the glove ring, a hair-thin red line had crept under the sealant band. On the outside of the glove, a clear filament trailed from the split branch he had clipped for Julia's sample without asking me first. The branch still hung from his specimen bag at his hip. Tiny feeder threads from the cut end had entered his glove seam and vanished beneath the cuff. "Cut it," he said. I ripped the bag loose and threw it aside. The branch struck a trunk and stuck there, slowly sinking into the skin. "Knife." He drew his utility blade with his good hand. I slashed the glove ring, peeled it back, and saw 3 feeder lines sunk into the skin at his wrist. Each ran under the flesh toward the vein. Eric's face had gone hard with effort. "Tell me what to do." "Pain block first." He jammed the injector into his neck seal and hissed. I took a clamp from my medkit, crushed the tissue just above the entry points, then dug the feeders out with forceps. They fought for depth. I pulled until each one came free in a wet snap and dropped to the deck, twisting. Julia crouched beside me. "Save one. Stay back. I need to see." "Back." Tess stepped in at once and blocked her with an arm. I sealed Eric's wrist with foam and pressure wrap, then scanned. Blood loss minor, foreign protein load already rising. "You'll live for now," I said. That phrase did not help. "Your choices did this, not my phrasing." He gave one tight nod. Shame hit him harder than the pain. "Fair." Nate had his rifle trained into the trees. Something moved. Every one of us went still. A rippling travel of fluid ran up the trunks around us. Leaves turned in unison toward the inner hull as if listening. Then the wall ahead of us bulged. It began as a smooth swelling under a membrane lining the curve of the ship. Root bundles around it tightened and drew back. Human features pressed out from under the skin. Brow, nose, cheeks, mouth. One eye opened where no eye should have been and rolled until it found our lamps. Eric stumbled backward and would have gone down if I hadn't caught his harness. The face was adult, male, middle-aged maybe. The flesh that formed it came from the wall itself, stretched thin over bone shapes half present, half suggested by pressure from below. Lips worked around words with enormous effort. "Please," it said. Tess stepped forward before anyone could stop her. "Who are you?" The eye fixed on her, then on me. Recognition landed there in a way that turned my spine to wire. "Fresh," the face said. "Fresh blood." "We're here to help," Tess said. The mouth trembled. "Course. Wakes. Root." Julia edged around Tess with the scanner lifted. "Can you identify yourself?" The face forced the words through pain. "Inside. We're still inside." Its gaze shifted toward the habitat ring access at the far end of the arboretum. Membranes along the wall shivered around it, as if the ship resented the effort. "It learned the way," the face said. "Keeps us awake." The eye widened. It saw Eric, locked on him, and the next words came fast enough to understand. "Cut him away. Starts with blood." The wall surged inward. The face collapsed into the membrane. Root bundles slammed back across the place where it had been and smoothed themselves flat. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Then Nate said, "We are leaving." Julia's voice came strained with thought. That was retained cognition inside the hull. "That was a person begging," I said, "which means the absorbed population remains neurologically active in distributed tissue." Tess rounded on her. "Use plain English or use silence." Julia drew herself back together. "The ship is keeping minds inside its structure." Eric looked at his wrapped wrist. "And it likes fresh blood." A change moved through the arboretum. Light bands high above us brightened from dim amber to a soft white that mimicked dawn. Shutters along the inner access wall opened in sequence, revealing the transit doors into the habitat ring. Meridian had heard the exchange. Meridian was offering the next step. Tess looked at each of us. "We leave now blind, with one contaminated crewman and a ship that can lure any rescue crew in range. Or we follow the active systems to command and find a way to kill the beacon. Luke?" I thought of the face in the wall. I thought of the nursery. I thought of someone designing those cradles at a desk under clean light and signing off on infant drawer volumes as if he were ordering pipe gauges. "Command," I said. "Fast," Nate cursed. Eric checked the wrap on his wrist and tried for his old tone. Then let's move before the trees start contributing. Nobody laughed. We crossed the arboretum under the false morning and reached the transit doors just as the whole garden brightened another degree. Meridian wanted us moving. That knowledge rode in my chest with every step. The habitat ring elevator waited open. Old polished steel walls, handrails, emergency placards, family safety graphics with smiling figures and evacuation arrows. We packed in. Tess hit the call for residential central access, and the lift rose with a smoothness I trusted even less than rust. Halfway up, public address speakers came active overhead. A woman's voice, gentle and pleasant, spread through the cab. Good morning, residents. Meridian Day cycle has begun. Please report care dependents for scheduled wellness check. The voice broke on the last word and shifted into static, threaded with wet sounds from inside the walls. Then it returned in the voice of a man crying somewhere far away. Please, don't open. The channel cut. Eric pressed himself against the back wall. I have officially had enough of this ship. The lift opened on daylight. Meridian had built a dawn using broad-spectrum panels hidden along the habitat ring's inner shell, and those panels poured warm white light across streets, storefronts, apartment facades, trees and public squares arranged around the ship's curve. The scale hit me harder than the nursery or the forest had. This had been somebody's town, somebody's hope, cafes with folded chairs, a school commons with bright murals, a little public fountain gone dry at the center of a plaza. And all through the buildings, above the doors, inside the walls, along the undersides of balconies, ran the blood channels. Clear tubes thick as my arm braided through the architecture and vanished behind paneling. Collection manifolds stood in public service alcoves where water stations should have been. Every apartment block had feed branches entering through utility shafts. Meridian had dressed a circulatory network in the clothes of a neighborhood. Motion caught my eye overhead. I looked up. Transparent pods filled the inside face of the ring, level after level, stacked in ordered rows above the streets like display cases. Each held a human body suspended upright or reclined in support gel or wrapped in membrane slings. Men, women, children, elders, colonists in launch garments, colonists in care gowns. Colonists with their chests or limbs opened under clean surgical ports joined to the tube network. Thousands. Artificial morning had reached them. Lights inside the pods rose, some faces turned, eyes opened. A woman 3 levels above us brought a hand to the glass with painful slowness. On the opposite side of the plaza, a young boy stirred and began to mouth sound that had no path to reach us through the sealed chamber. Across the ring, more eyes opened, each person waking into the same held body and the same prison. My comm filled with involuntary noise from the team. Eric whispering a prayer he didn't believe. Nate saying no under his breath, as if the word might close the view. Julia inhaling sharply at the scale of it. Tess swearing once, low and human. A pod near street level hissed. Its occupant was an old woman with silver hair braided tight against her scalp. The front membrane retracted a hand's width. Her voice came out thin through a grated speaker. "You're real," she said. I crossed to her before anyone else moved. "Yes." She studied my suit, my faceplate, the cutter patch on my shoulder. She had been awake enough times to know what that meant. Hope touched her features and then fell away with brutal speed. How long? 300 years since launch. Her eyes closed once. When they opened again, the question in them was gone. She knew what kind of ship held her now. "Then there's no rescue," she said. I didn't lie to her. "No." She nodded a fraction, accepting the shape of it faster than anyone on our team had. "It wakes us in pieces, takes what it wants, puts us down before the mind breaks all the way. Some don't go down clean." Her gaze drifted upward to the other pods, then back to me. "It says morning when it means feeding. We're trying to stop it." "Kill it," she said. I put my glove on the pod. "We're trying." "Me first." The membrane around her chest showed fresh draw ports under the skin. Her pulse line on the pod display moved with weak regularity. She had been drained and refilled so many times that the veins in her neck looked stitched into place. "I can't do that yet." "You can." She fixed me with more strength than her body held. "Mercy still exists where you came from. Bring some with you." Alarms broke across the plaza before I could answer. Eric cried out. He had gone down on one knee near the elevator. Clear lines were pushing up through the deck, grating around his boots. Thin at first, then thicker, writhing through slots that had probably served as access for service lines long before the ship found new uses for them. His contaminated wrist had smeared blood across the floor when he fell. The lines found it at once and converged. I ran. Nate was already firing short, controlled bursts into the deck. Panels shattered. Fluid sprayed inside the cavity. The lines kept coming. Eric tried to stand. The floor opened under him in petaled segments. His right leg sank thigh-deep into a sleeve of soft tissue rising from below. He called my name then, full force, the sound of a man who had just understood he was still going to die. I reached him, grabbed under his arms and hauled. He came partway free. More lines shot from the opening and wrapped his waist and chest. One struck the seam at his neck ring and bit under the collar. Tess slammed a pry bar into the floor gap and forced it wider. Nate dropped to one side and tried to sever the lines with his combat blade. Julia crouched opposite me, hands in the gore now, dragging tubing free as fast as it pushed back. Eric's visor retracted on emergency fault when the neck seal failed. I saw his face clearly. Terror, pain, disbelief, then something else beneath all three. Recognition. "Luke," he said, "you get one job now. You hear me?" I kept pulling. My arms burned. The suit servos whined under strain. "Luke, I hear you. Save Tess. Finish it." The floor took him. It happened with awful care. His torso folded at the edge, ribs catching for a moment, then tissue from below opened and drew him through, making room for every part as though preserving structure mattered. His hand slipped from my grip last. I watched his fingers vanish between the petals of the deck. The opening closed with a wet seal. His blood stayed on my gloves. Public address came active a second later. Eric's voice filled the plaza, broken into fragments by channel noise and interference from older voices underneath. "Save Tess, Root, too many awake." Then dozens of other mouths joined in through the same speaker path, each phrase cut from different throats and eras. "Please, turn off the day. My son is 6. Open the wall." Tess seized my shoulder and hauled me back to my feet. "Move." My body wanted to stay with the place where Eric had gone. Mission, friendship, guilt, all of it pinned to that patch of deck. Tess forced motion into me by sheer command presence. "Luke, move!" I moved. We ran across the plaza as pods continued to wake around us. Faces turned, hands struck glass. Mouths formed questions and pleas I could not answer. The habitat ring had become a town of suspended witnesses. The ship was bringing them online because we were here. A terminal stood at the entrance to the central command transit, half hidden behind a map kiosk. I ripped its cover free and found the data port still active. My pad linked in. An archive stub spilled across the screen in fragments, enough for one recorded memo to resolve in low-res playback. A woman in launch-era Care Whites appeared, hair pinned back, eyes bloodshot from too many bad shifts. "Reserve population stable," she said. "Sedation loss remains above forecast in juvenile units. Wake protocol tied to breach, route drift, or command demand. If external contact occurs, maintain compartmental language. Civilian morale depends on preserving destination narrative." The file cut. Compartmental language. Destination narrative. The colony ship story had existed for the passengers, not the builders. Nate slammed the transit control with his fist. "Open." It opened. We piled into the command lift. The doors shut on the sight of the old woman in the pod. She was still watching me through the narrowing gap. I knew what she had asked. I knew what I had denied. That debt came with us upward. Tess leaned against the wall, breathing hard. Report. Meridian runs on blood, I said. Human blood. Nursery fed the system at one end, pods feed it here. Wake cycle keys off breach. Eric's contamination gave it a bridge. Julia wiped red from her gloves onto her suit thigh. The absorbed population retains partial consciousness in distributed neural structures. The system uses voice patterns from anyone it incorporates. Nate looked at her with open hatred. You saying that branch woke all this? I'm saying your friend had active foreign tissue in his bloodstream before we entered the ring. My friend had it because you wanted a sample. Tess cut across before he could step closer. Save it for a room that isn't trying to digest us. The lift rose. The recovered memo kept replaying in my head. Reserve population, sedation, destination narrative. Every family photo in that nursery had belonged to people boarding their own prison under a promise of new land. The command deck sat deep in the spine, wrapped close around structural supports and protected from the habitat ring by heavy pressure doors. Meridian opened the first two. The third required a blood-authenticated contact pad. I cut my palm with my utility blade before anyone could argue and pressed it to the glass. The door unlocked at once. Tess stared at the blood spreading across the reader. Tell me you didn't just volunteer yourself. Too late to debate it. The bridge beyond had once been a cathedral of root control, a circular chamber built around a raised central core, with command wells stepped down in rings. Wide projection panels lined the walls. Seats on articulated stalks faced inward toward the core. 3 centuries had transformed the whole room into one grown shape. The central core had split open and expanded into a massive body bound by support arms and bone-white spars driven through it from every side. Flesh the color of old bruises swelled between those braces in heavy folds. Thick cords ran from the mass into the floor and ceiling, out toward life support trunks, habitat feeds and drive systems. Parts of the surface had hardened into shell-like plates. Other sections remained wet and thin-skinned enough that fluid moved under them in slow, dark surges. A human frame might have existed somewhere in its ancestry. Scale and appetite had buried it. Julia stepped down the first ring with helpless fascination. This was the navigator. Nate kept his rifle on the mass. Say, creature. Words matter, she said. They do. That one fits. My cut palm throbbed. A nearby console had woken when I touched the door reader. Blood had crawled in a thin sheet under the glass and lit symbols across its face. I approached because somebody had to. When my hand hovered over the panel, pain struck behind my eyes and the bridge vanished. Dockyard light. Huge gantries over a hull still incomplete. Men in authority suits and pressure harnesses speaking across a sealed observation wall, while workers below craned a chained organism toward the open ship spine. One executive voice, calm and tired, saying the line as if he had used it for investors before he used it on himself. It turns toward dense biospheres. Its root sense appears coupled to feeding response. Containment requires distance, mobility, and supply. Another voice asked about the settlers. Sedation substrate, pressure buffer, long-term blood reserve. Public migration language remains essential. Then another flash. Launch day. Families waving. Brass band on the embarkation deck. Banners promising a second Eden. Beneath the embarkation ramp, hidden service crews priming draw lines and sedation loops inside the nursery. Then another. Far into drift. The original crew thinner, older, frightened. The chained mass in command swelling as route corrections grew sharper. One officer trying to cut reserve feed. Another shooting him through the face. The ship turning under hunger toward a charted colony world until emergency blood release dragged it off course. The bridge came back around me. I had both hands on the console rail. My cut palm had smeared blood across the glass. The symbols there shifted under my skin as if tasting. Tess was in my face. Talk. It was built this way, I said. From the start, the colony story was cover. The settlers were supply, sedation, route control. This thing could steer by hunger. They wrapped the ship around it and sent it into deep space. It was always a quarantine ark. Julia looked at the central mass with something close to reverence despite herself. They found an organism that could perceive route through biomass gradients. If it reached a settled world, it would head for population, I said. She nodded. And it has spent 3 centuries learning. Nate backed toward the exit. Then we blow the bridge and run. Tess was already scanning tactical options on the sidewell. Maybe. I leaned over the active console and forced myself through the interface logic. Meridian systems no longer separated like a clean ship diagram. Command, life support, sedation flow, habitat reserve, drive vector, all cross-linked through biological transfer. I found the beacon path first, then our docking data, then the thing that turned my mouth to iron. The Ark had copied our approach corridor. Not just coordinates, transit solution, timing through the outer rubble band, the exact route our cutter had taken back toward shipping lanes. I brought the plot up on the main screen. Tess understood it at once. If we leave, we give it the road home. Or it already took it, Nate said. It took it, I answered. Julia moved to another console and placed her gloved fingers into a recess that unfolded around her hand. The surface brightened with her pressure and blood from a tiny puncture I doubt she even felt. Root lock engages from the drive heart, she said. The core function migrated deeper when the command organism expanded. There's still a control nexus by the drives. Can we kill the beacon here? Tess asked. Maybe, I said. Can't trust it. The ship routes around damaged systems. We need the drive heart if we want course control. A warning light rolled across the upper screens. Docking spine camera. I tapped it open. Our cutter sat where we had left it, clamped to Meridian's collar. Around the hull, the Ark had grown a web of red translucent tissue from the dock walls onto our ship's skin. Tendrils traced our engine housings, comm mast, transponder stack. It was reading us by touch. Nate swore. We go now. Tess shook her head. If that thing copies our transponder and gets loose, every traffic net in the belt might wave it through. And if we stay, we die here. I looked at the route plot, the copied transit path, the warm blood drying on my glove from the door reader, the central corpse that had once guided the ship by appetite. Eric's last words came back with brutal clarity. Finish it. We go to the drive heart, I said. Nate rounded on me. You don't get that vote. Tess answered before I could. He does. He's right. Nate pointed toward the dock feed. Our ride is still there. For a few minutes, I said. After that, it carries Meridian's scent on every antenna. Julia spoke without taking her eyes off her console. If a living operator reasserts route quarantine and maintains sedation distribution, the Ark could remain viable. Tess turned slowly toward her. Viable for whom? For containment, for study, for every world that never needs to face this thing. For the people in the pods, I asked. She hesitated. That was enough. We left the bridge with fewer illusions than we'd entered with. Tess pulled 2 demolition packs from the emergency stores and handed one to me. Nate took point now because anger made him fast. Julia carried a data module full of whatever she had stolen from command. I bound my palm tighter and tried not to think about how easily Meridian had accepted my blood. The service descent toward the drive section ran through utility galleries wrapped around coolant trunks, cable runs and circulatory conduits thick enough to walk inside. Gravity fluctuated as we passed through rotating sections. Twice the walls flexed under our hands with slow internal contractions that had nothing to do with ordinary ship stress. Tess hid her limp as long as she could. On the 4th ladder drop, a transit hatch closed early and caught her left leg above the knee. The sound of bone damage carries through a suit in a way you never forget. She finished the descent because she was Tess Holt, and because some people take weakness as a personal insult from nature. I patched the leg at the next landing with foam splints and a pain blocker, while she kept issuing orders through gritted teeth. "Status?" she asked as I sealed the brace. "Bad and functional." "Good enough." Nate paced the narrow platform with his rifle ready. "Dock first, heart second. We still have a ship until we choose different." I checked the utility map I had stolen from command. "Docking spine is 3 decks up and 2 clicks aft. Drive heart is 1 deck down and straight ahead." He jabbed a finger toward the aft route. "That way is life." Julia had been quiet for several minutes. Now she said, "That way is infection vector plus copied route plus transponder mimicry. You know that." "I know I can still touch metal from my own ship." I looked at the internal traffic display overlaying my pad. Meridian had started to grow around the cutter. It was building housings that matched our transponder fins, shaping signal cavities, copying our profile so it could wear us later. I made the choice before the debate could split us wider. My pad still held remote access to the cutter's fuel cells. Emergency burn. Hard override. No confirmation required. I keyed it. The blast came through the ship as a heavy shove under our boots. The platform lights dipped. Somewhere aft, alarms rose through the structure. Nate spun on me with murder on his face. "What did you do?" I met his stare. "Burn the cutter." He slammed me against the wall so hard my helmet rang. "You stranded us." I shoved back and caught his wrist before his free hand could reach the sidearm. "I cut off its disguise. You don't get to make that alone." "No," I said. "I get to make it before we all lose the chance." Tess barked his name with enough force to break the moment. Nate released me and stepped away, chest rising fast. "You had no right," he said. "I had one chance." He came for me again. This time the wall behind him opened. A seam I'd taken for a maintenance joint split down the middle. Soft red tissue surged out around Nate's right arm and shoulder. He fired once into the opening before it wrapped his face and drove him sideways into the gap. Tess raised her pistol and shot the wall 3 times point blank. Each round punched deep and vanished into meat. The opening tightened. Nate's legs kicked once, boots scraping sparks off the deck, then drew inward. His left hand remained outside for a second longer than the rest of him, fingers clawing empty air. "Halt!" he cried. Then the seam sealed with him inside it. His voice came back through a nearby vent grill, muffled and wet and still entirely Nate. "Halt! Halt!" Tess fired into the grill until the chamber clicked empty. Silence returned in pieces. Julia spoke first, very quiet now. "The ship is reallocating absorbed cognition faster." Tess turned on her with a look I had never seen on her face before. "One more sentence like that and I'll feed you to it myself." Julia accepted that. She tucked the data module into her suit chest and said nothing. We moved again because staying still had become its own form of consent. The drive heart sat inside a chamber large enough to house a small station, wrapped around the Ark's root engines and the main feed reservoirs that had once carried fuel, coolant, and mass balance water. Meridian had remade all of it. Reservoir towers rose along the walls filled with dark red fluid moving in slow internal rolls. Huge transfer channels crossed the floor under clear plates. At the center stood the root cradle, a throne-shaped recess of bone-white support arms and red conductive tissue facing a ring of control surfaces. Beyond it, buried in armored housings, the drive assemblies waited like restrained thunder. Tess could barely put weight on her damaged leg by then. She sank onto a support frame and shoved the second demolition pack into my hands. "Listen," she said. "You get one clean run. Either you break the root and send this heap into the dark, or you tear the drives open and burn the whole place." Julia stepped into the center of the chamber and looked at the root cradle with naked hunger. "Burning it wastes the only functioning quarantine system ever built for this scale of threat." Tess laughed once, harsh and short. "There she is." "You heard what it is," Julia said. "You also heard what it prevented." "At their expense forever?" I asked. Her answer came fast. She had already made peace with it. If the reserve population stays in cycle and a human operator maintains root discipline, the Ark can continue its function. Tess's mouth twisted. Say feed. Your solution wants feed. Containment costs something. You mean someone. Julia didn't flinch. Billions of someones on settled worlds, or thousands already inside the system. That is the math. No, I said. That's the excuse. I stared at the root cradle. Thin red filaments climbed its arms and sank into the control ring. A handrest unfolded as I approached, sensing heat or blood or intent. Beyond the cradle, the great reservoirs fed into branching channels that ran straight toward the habitat ring. Every pod upstairs, every child in the nursery, every face in the wall. One system. Someone stays here and steers, I said. Julia did not blink. Yes. With the colonists in the loop. Yes. You volunteering. Her silence told me the truth. She wanted the ship whole. She wanted the knowledge. She wanted the quarantine. She had never meant herself for the chair. Tess saw it too. Cowardice arrives in educated language now. Good to know. I stepped into the cradle before Julia could answer. The supports closed around my arms and spine with warm pressure. Tiny needles found the cut in my palm and the veins at my wrist. Pain flashed white. Then the chamber opened inside my skull. Voices. Thousands of them, layered through fluid and distance, each trapped in loops of sleep, waking, extraction, memory, drifting thought. Children asking for parents, adults begging unseen staff for release. Crew officers reciting duty phrases until those phrases dissolved into prayer. The old woman's rasp. Nate's fury, chopped raw. Eric somewhere in the middle of it all, stunned and furious and still trying to be useful. Luke, his voice clearer than the rest for one shocking instant. Don't let her keep this going. I saw the root math then, not as numbers on a chart, but as gradients of life spread through nearby stars and worlds. The thing bound through Meridian felt those gradients as food. Every inhabited place shone to it through the dark with unbearable attraction. The Ark's builders had chained that urge to blood feed and course correction, steering it away from dense populations by giving it enough to stay docile and mobile. A prison run by appetite, and every person in the system felt the draws, every sedation dip, every partial waking, every false morning. Mercy still exists where you came from, the old woman had said. I opened my eyes. Julia stood at the control ring, hands hovering over override surfaces. Tess had dragged herself closer with her pistol back in hand. Luke, Tess said, breath rough from pain. Can you set a course? Yes. Julia stepped forward. Toward what? The star in this system. Her face changed then, and I saw the zealot at the bottom of the scientist. You would destroy 3 centuries of contained adaptation. I would end 3 centuries of butchery. You kill every mind still in suspension. They're already inside the kill. She reached for the override. Tess shot her through the side. Julia staggered, stared at the spreading red across her suit, and still kept going. She grabbed the nearest control arm with one hand and blood-signed it by accident. Meridian accepted the input and opened a service seam behind her. Tissue folded out and wrapped around her waist before I could move. Her eyes met mine as the wall drew her backward. You need an operator, she said. You need... The seam took her. Her words cut off. A second later, her voice came through the chamber speakers in chopped syllables mixed with older cries. Tess lowered the pistol and sat down hard on the deck. That solves one argument. I forced my hands across the control ring. The interface wanted blood logic, not button logic. Feed flow, sedation draw, root vector, wake threshold. I found the reserve dump and armed it. If I opened every pod into the core at once, the entity would surge for intake across the whole ship. In that feeding spasm, the root controls would loosen just enough for one hard override. Tess watched my face. Tell me what it costs. Everything. Good, she said. means it's real. I armed the pack I'd set against the drive shielding and routed it to a deadman hold under my left thumb. Tess still had the second charge to place. The star course took shape on the main display as a long inward fall through solar weather, and heat bands no hull of this age could survive. The drive heart fought me. Meridian wanted dark, distance, more time. The bound thing beneath the ship wanted any place with more minds. I hit the reserve release. Across the chamber the towers convulsed. Dark fluid rushed through the clear floor channels in a violent surge. Somewhere far above us pods were opening, seals breaking, bodies emptying into the main drawer. The voices in my head rose to a scream so vast it lost words and became pressure. Then, one by one, some of them changed. The agony remained. Under it came something else. Relief. The relief of final direction after endless violation. The relief of an ending chosen at last. Tess heard something in the speakers too. Her eyes went wet and furious at once. "Stay on it!" The root control loosened. I drove the Ark toward the star. Warning bands rolled across every screen. Hull load, thermal exposure projection, structural collapse forecast. I locked them out. A new tone sounded from the chamber entrance. Service doors cycling under emergency pressure. The ship was sending more of itself toward us. Tess pulled herself to the final demolition pack by the drive housing. She looked at me once, like she was checking whether the man in the chair was still me. "You got family?" she asked. "Ex-wife. She deserved better." Everybody did. She planted the charge and armed it manually. Her injured leg buckled on the way back. She caught herself on a conduit and sat against it, pistol in her lap. "Tess, I know. I'm done moving." The chamber lights shifted from false day white to warning red. Heat began to rise through the deck. Meridian had turned its face towards the star. The voices in the system changed as the feed collapsed into the core. Some went silent, some sharpened. Eric came through again, clearer now, as if the whole ship were thinning between us. "You did good, Luke." "Wish you were wrong," I said aloud. The root held. The star swelled across the forward screens, first as a hard, bright disk, then as a huge burning wall threaded with storms. Meridian shook around us. Plates tore loose somewhere beyond the chamber. A whole branch of the reservoir network burst and rained dark fluid across the far side of the room. I opened a recording channel. "This is Luke Decker, recovery specialist aboard contract cutter Westray. Ark Meridian is a quarantine vessel. Public settlement status was false from launch. The ship contains a blood-fed deep space organism integrated into life support, root control, and structural systems. External contact wakes, reserve populations, and accelerate spread through interface tissue. Any future recovery attempt ends at range. Do not board, destroy on sight." I sent the message through every channel the dying comm array still had. Maybe none of it would escape the heat well. Maybe a fragment would. Tess listened, then closed her eyes against the conduit behind her. "That'll do." The star filled everything. Heat alarms failed in sequence. The outer hull must have been shedding by then, whole deck sloughing away into plasma. Through the command link, I felt the Ark's history run out of room. Families embarking under banners. Care staff lying to mothers in nursery wards. Officers convincing themselves that distant strangers justified any present cruelty. The chained creature learning human route maps by feeding on human blood. 3 centuries of wrong preserved in perfect working order. And then the preserved minds began to go. The voices thinned like a storm moving off over water. One after another the loops cut. Questions ended. Pleas ended. Names ended. What remained in the chamber was smaller, harsher, more singular. The bound thing at the center of Meridian, furious beyond language that the feast had become fire. It pushed against me through the root cradle with its last strength. Images crashed into my head. Crowded worlds, bright oceans under sky, cities heavy with bodies, all of it shining to its hunger like lanterns across black fields. It had spent 3 centuries learning the taste of us through a straw. It wanted the cup. I clamped both hands into the control arms until the bone-white supports bit through my gloves. "No," I said, and the word carried the weight of every deck below us, every cradle, every pod, every face in the wall. My whole life had bent around one failure after another to keep death from a child. Kettering had taken my son through bad luck, bad seals, bad timing, all the little cowardices institutions use to hide from blame. Meridian held the same crime at holy scale. It had made children into inventory and called that survival. The star reached up and took the ship. The forward screens went white, then molten gold, then black as they failed. The chamber split down one wall, and a sheet of raw light poured through, carrying vaporized metal and hard radiation. Tess vanished in it before I could turn toward her. The root cradle locked around me and kept me facing front. The bound mind under the ship tore at itself and at me and at the dying controls, searching for one last turn away. I thumbed the dead man hold. The drive charges went together. For a fraction of a second, Meridian opened from the inside. I felt every path inside the ship at once. Nursery lines, arboretum routes, pod feeds, wall mines, bridge cords, dock growths, all of it flashing into one immense map of suffering, then breaking apart. The pressure in my skull vanished. The borrowed voices stopped. The thing in the core lost shape, lost route, lost continuity. Fire entered everywhere. My last clear thought carried the old woman's request back to me. Mercy still exists where you came from. I had brought what I could. Then Ark Meridian came apart in the mouth of the star, and the dark that followed held no voices at all.